Tonight we're starting a new series on Sefer Mishlei. In English, Mishlei means parables, and I'm not really sure how long it's going to take us. It may take us even 2 years. There are 31 chapters, and even though we won't be going through every single pasuk, but there are quite a few ideas expressed in every chapter, and some of those ideas we may only be able to cover one at a time. So tonight will be somewhat of an introduction, and we will cover one of those ideas expressed in Perek Aleph in chapter 1. But perhaps I should give you a little bit of an introduction about Shlomo Melech, about this book and other books that he wrote. Mishlei, which is one of the books that he wrote, is really divided into 3 parts. It is divided into a section that deals with the Chokhmah, with the knowledge of Hashem, the wisdom, the importance of that knowledge that we have, that treasure trove, and its purpose, what we can gain from it. In another section that is contained in Mishlei is the Musar, many of the instructions, and as we would call it, the ethics, the Musar, how to guide ourselves in our life, the discipline, the benefit that we can gain from following those instructions and the advice that Shlomo gives us, and obviously the Torah, the precious Torah, how precious it is to us and how we should be careful with it. That is how the Sefer of Mishlei is pretty much divided. There's a question, however, as to what Shlomo composed first, because he wrote also Kohelet and he also wrote Shir HaShirim. Various opinions as to which one was written first. Some say that Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which discusses the relationship between Am Yisrael and Hashem, was written when he was a young boy. Some say it was written at the very, very end of his life, because it is full of secrets, it's Kodesh Kodashim, it is a very holy book. Some say that he wrote Mishlei early on in his life, and Kohelet when he was a little bit older, in his teenage years. So there's various opinions as to which one was written first. Nevertheless, it is obvious that every Sefer has another message, where Shir HaShirim discusses the relationship between Am Yisrael and Hashem. Kohelet, in a sense, discusses the experience, one may say, that Shlomo Melech had in all his life. Tremendous amount of experience, and he has a lot what to share with us. After all, he was the wisest man of all, he was the richest man of all, he had so much. And therefore, he had a lot of experience. And that is all elaborated in Sefer Kohelet, which is a fascinating book, and we've covered that many years ago. Maybe at some time we'll go back to it. Mishlei is, however, a little bit different. As we said, it's divided into various sections dealing with the Chokhmah, the Musar, and the Torah. But it contains all along a lot of advice in all areas of life. You will find here very, very valuable advice. And the same way this was good advice back then, it is still very, very relevant today, as you will see. Why is it called Mishlei? Mishlei means parables, because there's a lot of information in the Torah that can only be expressed as a parable. A parable, a mashal, is a form of levush. It is a clothing. To clothe something which is difficult to explain, because it's very deep perhaps, to clothe it in terms that human beings can understand. So a lot of the wisdom, a lot of the information that we have in Mishlei has to be expressed in a mashal, because that is the best way that we will understand it. Quick example, you will find that the Torah is from time to time described as Isha Tova, as a good woman, which is a blessing to a husband, right? So sometimes in order to describe the value and how precious the Torah is, Shlomo compares it as a beautiful, good woman. Whereas the apikorsut and the avodah zarah, heresy and idolatry and all the vanities of the world are compared to a bad woman. Because everybody knows how bad that could be. So in order to explain these in human terms, in terms that we can relate to, some of the deep topics are therefore dressed in a mashal, in a parable. Not only are these mishalim expressed in other words, in parables, all this information, but also a nevuah, a prophecy, or a true dream, would many times appear as a hidah, as an enigma, as a puzzle. We don't necessarily clearly see what's going on in a dream. It appears more as in a puzzle. Same thing with a prophet. with his prophecy. He would not see things very, very clearly. The only one who saw very, very clearly was Moshe Rabbeinu, as though he would be talking to his friend. He understood right away. And Navi would have to try to figure out what this prophecy was all about. What was it saying? And the same is true with the dream. It needs to be interpreted. However, the higher the neshama, the higher the level of the neshama, the more clarity there is in the dream. We're talking about real dreams right now. Most dreams are not real anyway. But the real dreams appear usually as a hida, as a puzzle, and they're not always clear and they need to be interpreted. Another area where we find puzzling words is in the Midrashim and in the Agadot. You learn Gemara, you will find sometimes stories, all social stories and various discussions called Agadeta. And Midrashim, these two, Agadeta and Midrashim, are not always very clear. They cannot always be understood very well. And we are told to be careful when learning a Midrash not to take the words literally. It's not literal. There's something hidden there. And because there's something hidden there, the rabbis did the same, as Shlomo Melech did. They dressed it up in a mashal, or in some form, that we should understand a little bit of what is going on, but we don't necessarily from those words understand the hidden meaning, what's contained in there. Unless, of course, we read the commentaries or we learn it from somebody who does understand. So sometimes hidden pieces of information are to be found in all of these hidot and meshalim, and we should not take these words literally. Shlomo Melech, as you know, had a very, very special request from Hashem. Hashem asked him, what would you like me to give you? I will give you anything you want. And he asked, what's most important to me in life is chokhmah. Give me wisdom. And Hashem was very happy that he chose wisdom, and he says that since you chose chokhmah, which is very important, I will also give you wealth. And there was nobody as wealthy as Shlomo. There was nobody as wise as Shlomo. Shlomo Melech, obviously, by choosing this chokhmah, is letting us know that it's not only important to him, it's important to everybody. And after he had acquired it, he decides to share it with us. That is why he put together this sefer. This is valuable information. That where did he gather all this information? He died at the age of 52. But all of this information came from his experience, obviously. It's based on what the Torah writes. It's not made up. But we must remember at all times, whenever we read any of the books of the Ketuvim, of the Nevi'im, or even the Gemarot, it was written by Ruach HaKodesh. In order for those words to be recorded for all generations, in order for Am Yisrael to treat this as a holy book, it had to be written by Ruach HaKodesh. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu maskim. He's in agreement with every single word. Otherwise, that book would have been burnt. It would not have gotten out to the public. And there was a time that the rabbis had some problem with what Shlomo Melech wrote in Shir HaShirim or in Kohelet, because it could sound very contradictory or problematic if you don't understand it well. Until, of course, they read through the entire book and they realized what his kavanah was, what his intention was, that it was all Hashem Shamayim. It was not like they thought. So everything is Beruach HaKodesh, everything is based on what is written in the Torah. The first 6 pesukim in chapter 1 is really an introduction. Shlomo Melech himself gives an introduction to this book called Mishlei. And he discusses in the very beginning who the author is and what the purpose of this book is. And what does he say, who is the author? He says, Mishlei Shlomo ben David Melech Israel. He gives himself 3 descriptions. The author is Shlomo, he's the son of David, and he's a king of Israel. He doesn't do that elsewhere. Why does he give himself these 3 descriptions? Because Shlomo HaMelech is telling us that this is not just an ordinary book. When people talk, when you hear a speech, when you read a book, it's very important who wrote it. It's very important who is saying those words. Because in order for the words to be effective, in order for us to be receptive of those words, it has to be coming from one who is a true Chacham and Yireh Shamayim and God-fearing. Otherwise, the words will not be as effective. That is what our tradition says. Dvarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim halev, words that come out of the heart, penetrate the heart. Words that are said by one who's God-fearing are going to definitely be more effective than one who does not practice what he preaches. So it's very important to know who is saying these words. Should we trust him? So he tells us, first of all, that Shmi is Shelomo. Shelomo is the Chacham Mikol Adam. It's not just anybody. This is a smart man who's saying this. Like in Kohelet, when he talks about that everything is vanities, it's not a poor man talking, it's the richest man in the world who had everything his heart desired. He's saying, he is the one that's saying everything is vanities. So the one who's about to tell us this information is Shelomo, Chacham Mikol Adam. And this is a man of integrity because he's Ben David. He's the son of David. He's not just the son of any pauper, of anybody. And he's a Melech al Israel. Melech Israel meaning that he was also king, just not an ordinary man. He therefore had a lot of experience, and therefore he has the samchut, he has the authority to say what he's going to say. We can trust him. When we hear about Mishalim, Proverbs, the first thing that may come to our mind is 1001 Proverbs that we may have read in high school. You know, there are books like that. Proverbs, international sayings, quotations, right? You may have seen it. They're very, very cute. Some of them are very, very nice. And they definitely, many of them at least, contain a lot of grain of truth in them. But there's a big difference between those Meshalim and the Meshalim of Shlomo HaMelech. You cannot compare them. These are not just plain quotations, cute sayings as they appear. There's a big difference. As the Al-Shich HaKadosh says about the difference between the various Meshalim, the Meshalim of Shlomo HaMelech come from Ruach HaKodesh. And anything that comes from Ruach HaKodesh is not only effective, it leaves deep roots in our neshama. It has the ability, if we study them, to make a tremendous impression on us, to make roots. Whereas the Meshalim of other people are nothing. A person can study them, read about them, and can easily dispose of them. They don't necessarily leave an impression on us. Meshalim that were composed with the help of Ruach HaKodesh, not only is it true, but it also has the ability, if we study them, to leave an impression on us. So it's not only nice, it's not only a nice thing to just talk about it, it's important to learn Mishlei, just like any other sefer. It contains a lot of valuable information that can make a tremendous impact in our life, because it was written with Ruach HaKodesh. What's the purpose of the sefer? After telling us who the author is, he begins with the next pasuk to tell us that purpose, the tachlit of why he wrote this book is Ladat Chochma Umusar, Lehavin Imrei Bina. Loosely translated in the English that you will find in English translations is to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. I don't always agree with the English translation, but just for those of you who have a hard time with the Lashon HaKodesh, I have here a translation. In other words, the purpose of this book is Ladat Chochma Musar, is to know, to acquire Chochma Musar. As we said before, it's very important. And that is the whole tachlit of this sefer. Now he says, after those words he adds, Lakachat Musar Haskel Tzedek Umishpat Umesharim. To receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity. Lakachat. Lakachat is very, very powerful word. Lakachat means to acquire, to make it your own. In other words, all of this information is not just an exercise to learn out of curiosity to see. It's actually meant for you, for one to acquire, to make it a part of him. Because one needs to know how to lead his life. So he needs to acquire this. Lakachat also means to be prepared to learn from others. Therefore, the purpose of this book is not just the knowledge of the Chokhmah, is to realize that this is really a tachlit. This is really the purpose of life. One is born here, not just to work, to eat, to drink, and to sleep, but actually to pursue this Chokhmah. This is an end in itself. To go out and find out all that there is to find out, as much as we can according to our level of understanding of this very important Chokhmah. And what do we acquire at the end? Chokhmah and Musar. Chokhmah is the knowledge of what is out there, and Musar is the midot tovot, the characteristics that we have to adapt to ourselves. Because the human being is raw when he's born. Little by little he develops, he grows physically, and it's up to him to perfect himself. Where does he perfect himself? In the area called midot. Here midot is being called Musar. So there's chokhmah, the knowledge, the information that he knows, that he needs to know, how to guide himself, and there's the musar, which are the midot. How should I behave? How should I deal with people? Should I get upset? Should I yell or not? That's not written in the Torah necessarily. These are called midot tovot, hanhagot tovot, proper behavior. All of this is contained over here. All of this needs to be acquired. That is the purpose of this book, and that is an end in itself. Now, why is chokhmah mentioned together with musar, even though the two are different? Because chokhmah is supposed to lead to musar. When one learns, hopefully he will realize what's important in life, what he needs to do, how he should behave. Chokhmah has a purpose, as opposed to what? As opposed to the goyim. Goyim also learn chokhmah. The rabbis tell us, chokhmah ba'goyim tamin. If somebody tells you that there is a non-Jewish chacham, he's a very wise man, you can believe it. There are a lot of intelligent non-Jews out there. Knowledgeable, I should say, not intelligent, knowledgeable. That's what chacham means. But that chokhmah doesn't go anywhere. They don't do anything with that chokhmah. Anything, except for perhaps invent, create that which is material. It does not necessarily make of them a better person. The purpose of chokhmah, the real purpose, is to become a better person, to become closer to Hashem. So therefore chokhmah is mentioned together with musar, because the goal of chokhmah is not just to study and to know the entire encyclopedia by heart, is to take that chokhmah and put it to practice. And that is what we call musar. In other words, the chokhmah is supposed to lead to musar. This chokhmah and musar you will find by other nations too. They have their chokhmah, they have their musar. They don't have Torah, but they have a chokhmah musar. And there's a big difference. Our chokhmah and musar, the chokhmah and musar that we will be studying here, is eternal. It's good for all times. Whereas by the goyim, whatever chokhmah and musar they had a year ago, a generation ago, is not necessarily valid today. It's changeable. So what we have here is eternal. Tremendous big difference between the chokhmah and musar that is out there. Why is this eternal? Because this chokhmah and musar is anchored in the truth. And truth is eternal. It does not change. Another reason why the chokhmah and musar are mentioned together, the rabbis tell us, because it is necessary to have the two to do battle with the Yetzer Hara, in order not to fall into the trap. And we will be seeing, B'ezrat Hashem, beginning next week, the various traps that the Yetzer Hara sets up. And he's very creative. And the traps are not the same every single day. In other words, if we succeeded staying out of the trap yesterday, there's no guarantee that we will not fall tomorrow, because the traps change. The combination of chokhmah and musar, by learning it and adapting it, will help us avoid these traps. That is why, another reason why they're mentioned together. They're both necessary. They can't be one without the other. Next, Shlomo Melech tells us that when you read my book, you will see, I'm skipping a little bit, you will see lehavin mashalu melitza divrei chachamim v'chidotam. You will see that the meshalim are not so simple, that there is a mashal and a melitza, and you have to know both. In other words, what Shlomo Melech is telling us here, a few pesukim down, is that many times when you see my parables, you should know that there are two layers here. I'm going to give you an example. In chapter 2, in Perek Bet, and elsewhere, he says that all of this chokhmah, all of this Torah, is to protect you, to save you, Latzilecha mi isha zara, to save you, to protect you from a isha zara, from a foreign, strange woman, minochriya, from a non-Jewish woman. In a sense, nochriya could also be not the right woman, amareya helika. She uses her words to seduce you. Be careful from that kind of a woman, a bad woman. That's all he's talking about? Is that what the Torah will do? Is just protect us? No. This is a mashal about what? About being protected and avoiding avodah zarah, apikorsut, heresy, and idolatry that we said before is compared to a bad woman. In other words, the mashal being used here is for what? Not necessarily for a bad woman, a strange woman, but for all those things in the world that can mislead us. This will protect you from being misled. So Shlomo Melech tells us here, there is in those words a mashal and a melitza. The mashal is about the heresy and the avodah zarah being expressed in these words, And these words that are being used to express the mashal is a melitza. Melitza is how this is, in a sense, how this is figured. I think here it translates it figure. They're both important. In other words, Shlomo Melech is saying, be aware of the mashal, what is being compared here, the avodah zarah and the heresy. And be aware of the additional words that were used as the melitza. Yes, and by the way, in fact, stay away from women who are evil, who are misleading, who seduce. Very, very dangerous. In other words, even though that's not the main mashal here, that is the melitza, which is just as important. So we see that in the various mashalim, there can be two layers. Not just one idea being expressed, but much more information being given to us. That is the difference between mashal and melitza. Both can be being contained in the same pasuk. What happens if somebody only has chokhmah and no musar? One who studies a lot, he can study all the gemarot, but he has no musar. He did not change his ways, does not learn musar. He can become very knowledgeable, perhaps, but it will not lead him anywhere. Even though it is true that the rabbis tell us a person should always learn Torah shelo lishma, even though he is learning it not for the sake of heaven, because eventually if he learns a lot of Torah, hopefully the light of the Torah will do him a lot of good. But if his main goal here is just to acquire the knowledge base without any yirat shamayim, because the musar is the yirat shamayim, then he will not get anywhere. This chokhmah, all this knowledge will not lead him to any tachlit. Tachlit is the ultimate goal, the purpose of the chokhmah. It would not lead him to where he needs to go. He will become very knowledgeable, but it will not do anything for him if it does not have as well the musar as well. Okay, so this is an introduction of what is going on in this book, who wrote it, and why he wrote it for. And now we're going to begin with the meshalim. The first mashal is in pasuk zayin. Yirat Adonai reshit da'at, chokhmah u'musar evelim bazu. The fear of Hashem, was Yirat Hashem, is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. I just read you the translation of that pasuk. There are two ideas expressed here. Yirat Hashem reshit da'at, that the fear of Hashem is the beginning of knowledge. But fools, it's another idea, fools despise wisdom and instruction. Very strange. I mean, what are the two doing in the same pasuk? Even though one is contrary to the other, there are some people who like and some people who dislike it, and they're fools. We will see that there are two very important ideas expressed over here. Yirat Hashem reshit da'at. Shlomo Melech is telling us that the fear of Hashem is the beginning of all knowledge. What does that mean? It means that the first condition to acquire any knowledge of Torah has to be Yirat Hashem. In other words, what one should have in his mind is that he wants to be a God-fearing person, that he believes in Hashem, he fears Hashem. That's a very important prerequisite. Because if he has that, that will give him the dachat, that will give him the impetus to want to learn. Why is this important? Did you ever wonder why some children are not interested in sitting down and opening a book, a sefer? They'd rather do something else, collect cards, go to ball game. I mean, everybody has preferences. Everybody has preferences. Yeah, I'm not talking about in the free time. I'm talking about when they should be learning, in school. If there is no Yirat Hashem, strong Yirat Hashem, there will be no dachaf, no push, no impetus to want to know this. Why should I open this book? It's boring. Some may say, Chas v'shalom. Sefer Vayikra. Try to open Sefer Vayikra. Not Bereshit, not Shemot, not Bamidbar Devarim. And read about the Korbanot. If you're not a Kohen, you might say, why do I have to know this for? Olah, Chatat, Shelamim, Asham, what was brought on the fire, what was eaten by the Kohen, all these details. If there's no Yirat Hashem, one does not have a real interest in learning. There will be no dachat. So therefore, he says, the first prerequisite, the first condition for learning this chokhmah has to be fear of Hashem. Because that will, not only is that the first thing that should be there before anything else, but that is important because that will give him the impetus, the dachaf, to want to acquire this knowledge. Number two, Yirat Hashem is the foundation of everything, of all knowledge. If you have that foundation, you can build. Whatever you will learn later on will go on this solid foundation called Yirat Hashem. You know what happens when there's no such foundation? The guy learns everything, and he has his own opinions. He interprets things how he wants. And that's where reform movements spring out. Nah, Moshe Rabbeinu, he had his committee, and I have my committee. It was all a committee. There's no what's missing here. Yirat Hashem, just, Chaz v'Shalom, that's missing. Then of course, people start interpreting things how they want, according to what suits them. Yirat Hashem therefore has to be a solid foundation, and after that you can build Chokhmah, and you will always be careful. Wait a minute. What does the Torah say? What does the Halakha say? Maybe I should ask somebody who knows more than me, because I have Yirat Hashem. If you have Yirat Hashem, then you're careful not to make a mistake. That has to be the foundation. If that's not the foundation, then whatever you start building on top of that is very fragile. Another idea of why this has to be the beginning is because we're talking about over here Reshit Da'at. Da'at is information. Is pieces of information that we acquire. What should be the first piece of information that we acquire, that a child acquires? Yirat Hashem. As I explained in the past in another lecture, why one who's in first position is always stronger. Like a loan, 2 loans, the first and the second. The first is in a stronger position. You have to sell the house. There's not enough money to pay off the 2 loans. Who gets the money? The one who's in first position. Do you understand what that means? To be in first position is very powerful. If a child receives Yirat Hashem early on, then later on it will be difficult to replace that with something else. He has solid foundation, he has good roots, hopefully, he will control himself. If one only acquires Yirat Shamayim later on in his life, for 50 or 60 years he's been brainwashed with communism and with heresy. So what's in first place? That all that heresy, it's going to be harder to convince him. Prove to me that there is a God. What do you mean? Ask any child who grew up in a Jewish school. It's so simple. But not to him, because what was in first position for so many years, he lived a certain life thinking one way. And some people are very stubborn. They don't change so quickly. And it's hard to change one's mind. In other words, I made mistakes. So some people have a hard time doing teshuvah only because they don't want to change. They can't recognize the fact they made mistakes. It's important, therefore, that Reshit Da'at is the Yirat Hashem, the beginning of everything, the beginning of anything that we know, that we acquire, any information, any knowledge. What should it be? It should be Yirat Hashem. That is why there was a great rabbi, the rabbi of Komarna, who said, if it was up to me and I could get away with it, he says, I would have every child at the age of 9 learn Zohar. If I could get away with it, if I could do that, I would do it. Why? Shetiyeh yirato kodemet lechokhmatam. So that the fear of heaven should come before his knowledge, before he learns Gemara, before he learns Mishlei, before he learns Halachot. Let the fear of heaven, which can be gotten through learning the Musar in the Zohar, not the Kabbalah in the Zohar. The Zohar contains a lot of Musar, things that anybody can understand, if it was up to him. In other words, the idea here is, the earlier on you give that child the Yirat Hashem, you impress upon him how great Hashem is, and how everything is controlled by Hashem and so forth, that will be a much more solid foundation upon which to build that knowledge base that will come later on in life. How could one have the knowledge of anything and not have the knowledge of the most important thing in the world, in life, that there's a God who created the world? How could you know everything about a plane, about a rocket, about biology and chemistry, and not have the most fundamental knowledge that there is a creator too? That is the most important piece of information, and that is what the Rambam begins his book, Yad HaChazakah, the very first sentence, Yesod HaYesodot ve'amud HaChochmot, or ve'amud HaChochmah, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all pillars. The beginning of any piece of information that a Jew needs to know, before he knows anything else, is Leidah sheyesh Shem Matzui Rishon. It's to know that there is an entity out there who is before everything else in the world, and he created the world, and he controls the world. That piece of information is number one before anything else. And if it's not there, then there's no real da'at. How could you? It's an incomplete da'at. Reshit da'at is therefore the Yirat Hashem. Yirat Hashem Reshit da'at. However, there's a question. It says somewhere, Imen chokhmah en yir'ah. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear of heaven. What does that appear to be saying? That you have to have chokhmah first. Imen chokhmah en yir'ah. Right? Doesn't that appear to be that? No. Chokhmah does not come before Yirah. We just said Yirat Hashem comes first. So what is Shlomo Melech telling with the words? Actually, no, not Shlomo Melech. It's in Pirkei Avot. What are the rabbis telling us? Imen Chokhmah en Yirah. one has to have the tools to comprehend Chokhmah. Because if he does not have the tools to comprehend Chokhmah, he's considered by the rabbis a bur. A bur is a total ignoramus. Ve'en bur yereh het. A bur cannot be a true God-fearing person because he lacks the capacity to reason. He does not have the tools. So that's what the rabbis meant. If en Chokhmah, if a person does not have the ability to reason, to understand knowledge, then how could he ever develop Yirat Hashem, which requires some basic tools of understanding. That's all it means. It does not mean that Chokhmah comes before Yirah. It means that you have to have that capacity, the ability, the kelim, the tools to reason, to understand. Because Judaism is not about brainwashing. It's about being able to understand and reason. And therefore, you need to have those tools to develop Yirat Hashem. When we read through Mishlei, we will find the terms Dat and Chokhmah. You actually will see sometimes Dat, Chokhmah, Binah. So I want to briefly explain the differences. Chokhmah is the accumulation of knowledge over time. Tremendous amount. It's not just one piece of information. It's over time you have acquired a lot of Chokhmah. Knowledge. Knowledge is not just one piece of information. Chokhmah is a lot. Dat, on the simplistic level, only on the simplistic level, just means knowing. Knowing one thing, knowing two things. So on the simplistic level, that just means learning or knowing a little bit, and Chokhmah means knowing a lot. On this simplistic level, what this pasuk will read, Yirat Hashem Reshit Dat, that the first thing that a child should know is that Hashem exists. In other words, one piece of information. Modeh ani lefanecha. Right? What does a child learn right away? What are the pasuk? Torah tzivaranu Moshe morasha kilat Yaakov. Small pieces of information of that. So the first pieces of information a child should receive is Yirat Hashem, teach him to make a blessing before he eats, before he puts something into the mouth. Why do I have to make a blessing? Because you're stealing. You have to ask permission. You have to say thank you to him after you put something in your mouth because he gave it to you. So Reshit, that, the very beginning, has to be lessons, instructions in Yirat Hashem. So that's on the simplistic level. On the simplistic level, that means bits of information. And what should the first bits of information be? Yirat Hashem. However, on a deeper level, on the Kabbalistic level, that is much higher than Chokhmah. Chokhmah just means knowledge, accumulation of knowledge. That means to actually know it. What does it mean to know it? You mean Chokhmah is not known? No, Chokhmah is separate. It has nothing to do with you. You learn it, you put it into your head, but it's not a part of you. When you take all that you've learned and you adapt it to your life, you apply it, that's called Dat, because Dat means chibur. Dat, on the Kabbalistic level, means that there is a connection between what I learned and what I do. I actually took all that I learned and I apply it. I made it a part of me. I've actually changed. My personality is now different as a result of all that chokhmah. In other words, all that chokhmah has become that. And then there's binah. Binah means to understand, to go one level higher. I use this to understand something else. I use this to compare it to something else. But that is therefore the highest level of chokhmah. It's internalizing what we've learned and applying it in real life. So we've described the first pasuk, or the first part of the pasuk, that Yirat Hashem Reshit Dat, that has to be the beginning. That is what we have to instill in a child. And hopefully if he gets that in first position, in first place, it will be a solid foundation on which to build the chokhmah that will come later on. But the second part of the pasuk, chokhmah u'musar evelim bazu, that all that wisdom and all that instruction and all that musar, the evil despises. Now, evil translated in plain English, you will find it to being a fool. But that's not the real translation. Evil is not a simple fool. The words here say that the chokhmah and the musar evelim bazu, they despise it, they ridicule it, they make fun of it. A fool does not necessarily ridicule and make fun. He may be a tipesh, if you want to say a fool. Maybe, in other words, he's ignorant, he doesn't know better, he's not smart. Evil is a form of rasha. This guy is wicked. This guy is no good. And that's why he makes fun. Because somebody who's a fool, the most he could do is perhaps ignore, not be interested, not appreciate. But when somebody goes ahead and makes fun, he may not know that this is valuable because he did not look into it. But in reality, he is a knowledgeable person. He is sane. And therefore, he's making a decision to despise it. So Evil is not just a fool, he's wicked. Now, why is he despising this? Why are some people interested and some people despise it? Anybody know what the root of the word musar is? Musar comes from the word musarot. It ties you down. Musar is ethics, discipline. Our lives are regulated by musar. This guy does not want to be regulated. This guy wants to live like a behemah, like an animal who's free to do anything it desires to do. And the musar is tying him down. And he doesn't want to be tied down. Very simple. And there's a lot of people like that out there who know the truth, but don't apply it in their lives because they don't want to be tied down. They want to do everything that their heart desires. And therefore, how do they justify it? They make fun of it. In order for them to live peacefully, for their conscience to be clean, they make fun. The greatest example is those who believed and followed Darwinism. Evolutionists, man came from monkey. How could you be an intelligent person and think like that? They themselves admitted, at least some of them, and it's written, that they only said so because they wanted to do what their heart desires. All those immoral behaviors out there, they very much like those things. How could they justify it if there is din v'yesh dayan? If there is a God who's watching over everything we do, that we have to give an accounting to eventually, that we have to explain our actions? We're not free. Oh yes, we are free, they said. You come from a monkey. It's all just happened by itself. It's a big bang. Do whatever you wish. That's what it is over here. It's evilim bazu. These are wicked people, not just fools, who make fun, who despise because they don't want to be tied down. The Malbim goes on to explain that this Yirat Hashem, Reshit Dat, that we're talking about, the reason why it's there in the very, very beginning is also because don't think that what you're going to be learning now, all this Dat, all this Chokhmah, this is what will give you necessarily Yirat Hashem. True Yirat Hashem, he says, is there naturally from the beginning. It is not acquired by the Sechel. Don't think that the Dat that you learn is what will give you the Yirat Hashem. Where does it begin? It begins naturally. Where? In the Nefesh, in the Neshama. Every Neshama is a Chelek Eloka Mimal. It is a part of God. And it is implanted in it the desire to go after that which Hashem wants us to do. In other words, the Neshama is attracted to that which is good. The Neshama has Yirat Hashem because it's a part of Hashem. So everyone naturally, if we listen to our Neshama, has the desire to do Hashem's will. We all have a spark. Jew and non-Jew. A Jew has a different kind of a Neshama, but nevertheless, everyone, naturally Hashem gave him the ability to do that which is good, which we call the Yetzer Tov. But in reality, it all comes from the Neshama, that spiritual part of us that is naturally attracted to Hashem. So the Malbim says, Yirat Hashem Reshit Dat, that the Yirat Hashem naturally is there in first place, in the very start. So what happens later when we learn the Dat? Later when we learn all this Dat and the Chokhmah, we're able to better understand it and further develop the Yirat Hashem and better express it. But it's there by itself, naturally. And we have to feed it, and we have to stimulate it in the child. We have to get it out of him. It's there already. It's there before anything else. We don't even realize it because it's part of the neshama. It's implanted there. We, of course, supply it with more dat and with more chokhmah to further stimulate, to further develop that Yirat Hashem so that it can be expressed in everything that we do. Now, we come to a very delicate part of all of this. Yirat Hashem Reshit Dat. What happens if somebody has no Yirat Hashem, but he has developed his own musar and his own system of discipline and chokhmah and cultured and an entire civilization based on certain rules and laws? Could this in any way replace Yirat Hashem? Chas v'shalom. Right? It cannot. But one may claim that yes, there's a lot of civilized good people out there who have a decent lifestyle, cultured, civilized, and they don't believe in Hashem. What are you going to say to that? Remember the Germans, the Nazis? That's the way they were. They were supposedly civilized, supposedly, according to their terms, civilized and cultured. They listened to classical music, very intelligent, very, very developed scientifically in many areas. But they stooped down to the level worse than an animal. Worse than an animal. How could this be? And I've explained it in the past, and I'll just briefly say it. The rabbis in Pirkei Avot tell us, "Im en derech eretz en Torah, im en Torah en derech eretz." They tell us that if one has no Torah, then he cannot have derech eretz, which means good behavior, to be a mensch, as we say in Yiddish, to have the proper midot. If one has no derech eretz, then he cannot have Torah, because what good is it all the Torah that he learns? It's worth nothing if he has no derech eretz. We can more easily relate to this one, that if one has no derech eretz, then all his Torah is not worth anything. But what about the other one? Im en Torah, en derech eretz? How about all those nice goyim that appear to be civilized? They have no Torah, right? Similar question, no Yirat Shamayim, but an entire culture, civilization, decent people. Is that possible? It's only apparent to the eye. It only appears so. But in reality, one has to remember what we said in the very beginning. There has to be a very powerful anchor to anchor down someone, to make him responsible for his actions, to have to give an accounting to a higher being. Only then will he somewhat be prevented from turning into an animal. Only then can we all feel more secure that this will become a true man. One who does not have the Yirat Shamayim, one who does not have the Torah, he may be decent, he may be a nice person, because his personality is like that, because he was trained like that. But training is not taming. You can train someone like they've trained bears and tigers, and how many times the guy in the circus or whatever got killed by the tiger that he's been feeding, taking care of all his life? These are wild animals. You cannot tame them. You can only train them. The Torah actually tames. The Torah anchors down all the values that we acquire and reminds us that we have a certain responsibility, that we're just not free to do what we wish. We cannot change tomorrow. Be one way today and be another way tomorrow. All of these civilizations, all of these cultures, if you offer them a nice sum of money, what we call a bribe, you can get anybody to do almost anything. In Mexico it may cost you 10 pesos, and over here it's going to cost you $1,000. But believe me, corruption is not just in Latin America, it's everywhere. It just may cost you a little bit more money, because there's nothing being anchored down to something that is truth, to something which is eternal, to some values that come from above. Everything is changeable. In Israel today, in the government, depending on what's in their best interest, their personal interest, not the interest of the Jewish nation, not in the interest of the land, it's what's best for them. There's no Torah, there's no Yirat Shamayim, there's no anchor to anchor down all those values, all that chokhmah that we've received. And therefore they go by what their heart desires. They are therefore evilim. They are wicked and fools. And that is why they despise everything that is holy, because that would tie them down. That would not give them the freedom to do what they want. So therefore, yes, you may see cultures out there, nice goyim, but kabdeo v'chashdeo. Give him the respect, but be very suspicious. You cannot be completely secure, because there's nothing there that will guarantee that tomorrow he will be the same as he is today. I want to finish with the story of the Chafetz Chaim. Father with his child once came to the Chafetz Chaim, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, and asked for a blessing. So the Chafetz Chaim says, yes, what kind of a blessing would you want? That my child should grow up to be a Yirei Shamayim, a God-fearing Jew. That's a beautiful thing to ask for. Every parent wants his children to be God-fearing Jews. But the Chafetz Chaim says, no, you don't understand. Yirat Shamayim you cannot get with a blessing. You have to work hard to acquire it. We can ask for blessings for parnasah, for health, and for those things, okay. But Yirat Shamayim is something that you have to work on the rest of your life. We don't retire from this work, from this Avodat Hashem. We have to nourish it and continuously develop it, continuously stimulate it. As we will see in the entire Sefer Mishlei, there are many things out there that try to mislead us and try to weaken us. to weaken our resolve, to weaken our attachment. And this Yirat Shamayim is the most fundamental of everything. That is the foundation. But even foundations that were once solid, if a big storm, a big earthquake comes, people are knocked down from their foundation. So we have to continuously repair if there are any cracks. And there are cracks. People sometimes develop cracks in their emunah, in their bitachon, in their Yirat Hashem. There's no guarantee, as I said before, that one will remain. There have been many stories in the Gemara of rabbis who were great for 80 years. For 80 years, Kohanim. And at the end of their lives, they unfortunately became weaker. How could this happen? It can happen to anybody. We're only human, we're frail. There are many temptations out there. We're being misled continuously by the Yetzer Hara. And Bezat Hashem, in the next coming year or two, however long it takes us to finish, we will see from Shlomo HaMelech's words how to do battle with the Yetzer, how to protect our emunah, and how to further develop and preserve our Yirat Shamayim.